Moin moin, good evening, hello and bonjour, or bonsoir rather. So yeah, I have the pleasure to give you some tips and tricks for IntelliJ IDEA and related IDEs today. I'll talk about myself a bit in a short moment. So what is this talk about now today? Well, first there are some slides introducing the IntelliJ platform and some history, some overview of all the IDEs and what's possible with it. And after that, we'll spend all the time live coding, live demonstration in the IDE itself. And you are a bit unfortunate because we only have 45 minutes, including Q&A. When I do this talk, usually at Java user groups, we took up to 2.5 hours. So you don't get the full program. But anyway, I'll try to squeeze in as much as possible today. So who am I? Who knows what Amiga stands for? Okay, there are some people over 40 in this room. So I've been doing Java for quite some time, and I actually started doing Java with IntelliJ IDEA. So I've been using it for 18 or 19 years now. And shortly after using it, I started developing a plugin for Struts1. Who knows what Struts1 is? Okay, some old school web developers as well. I did mostly web apps, and I was struggling building my struts XML properly because I always made the same errors. So I started developing a plugin to help me authoring the struts XML files. And shortly after that, I did the same for Struts2. And I joined JetBrains in 2012. And until last year, I've been working on the Spring Framework support in IntelliJ IDEA. And now I'm focusing on the tooling and advocating of plugin development for the IntelliJ platform. So I'm also responsible for the plugin dev kit, which is the tooling inside IntelliJ to help you authoring plugins. One disclaimer. So I just talked a bit about myself. Who is using IntelliJ or any related IDE? Oh, wow. Okay, who isn't? No one. I can't believe that. There's always one guy using NetBeans, come on. Well, okay, anyway, my disclaimer is still in effect. If you have any questions later on in the Q&A, I cannot compare how to do things in IntelliJ versus doing them in Eclipse or NetBeans or any other IDE, simply because I do not use them, so I'm not going to talk about it. Short overview of the IntelliJ platform IDEs that JetBrains does. So there's a couple, that's probably the most known ones. Some of them come in different editions as well. These are a bit more exotic for macOS, iOS development, database development, and MPS is a DSL language workbench. There's also one IntelliJ IDE which targets .NET called Rider. So what we did was using ReSharper, a plugin for Visual Studio, and we put IntelliJ platform on top of it for the UI, which is quite interesting from a technical point of view. And it's, to my knowledge, is the only cross-platform IDE for C#. The latest IDE that JetBrains did is an IDE for Go. Has been very successful. So there seem to be a lot of Go fans. There's also some IDEs from third-party vendors. The most known one is probably Android Studio from Google. Basically, what they did was taking the Android tooling plugin that we developed, and that was open source. They took it and they continued developing it, and now we are merging back and forth between Android Studio and IntelliJ. So that's completely open source. Cuba platform is a framework for developing applications, and there are more IDEs coming. IntelliJ cannot only be used, or the IntelliJ platform cannot only be used as a standalone IDE, but it's also running on a server. There's another product of JetBrains called UpSource, and we can run all the code inspections in there and also provide navigation in the browser using all the knowledge that IntelliJ has. So in total, and that concludes the short introduction, we have a number of IDEs. We support basically all important languages and frameworks out there. And there are more and more plugins available on the plugins marketplace, which can be installed in the IDE very easily. So if there's something that isn't shipped with your IDE, then just go and search for it. You will be lucky, hopefully. So now we are switching to the IDE and the core part of this talk. Everything I will demonstrate today is not specific to IntelliJ IDEA, so we are not going to speak about Java, JVM, or related frameworks specifically, but mostly about the IDE in general. So basically everything I show and demonstrate today can be used and reproduced in all the IDEs I just listed. So, before we go into features, I want to clear up one common misconception about using the IDE, performance-wise. There's a lot of talk on the internet about how to make the IDE faster or perform better overall. And people usually recommend to increase the memory allocated to the IDE, even suggesting something like 4 GB or even more. And I would highly recommend not to do so. Why is that? 2 reasons. A garbage collector still has to work, maybe sometime later, and it will take painfully long time, probably. Of course, there are parallel collectors now and all of that, but still you will notice the hit. And the other reason I would advise not to use such a huge heap, but rather something like 1 or 1.5 gigabyte as max, is if there are memory leaks in our products, we would like to know about them. And it's easier to reproduce memory leaks if you don't give it so much memory to, well, waste, basically. What if you still have performance problem? Is there some magic trick? I think there is one. And the trick is basically to invest in the best and fastest SSD drive that you can buy for your computer. Why is that? So the IDE has to know a lot of things about your project. It has to know all the files, it has to know all the classes, all the symbols, all the fields, everything in your IDE. It needs to be navigatable, needs to be inspectable and all of that. So this has to be stored somewhere. And what we use there is the term index. And everyone likes indexing, right? So that's the thing that happens during that background task. So those indexes are built on the hard disk and are later accessed all the time. So the faster the operating system and memory mapped files and whatever is between there can access those index database later during working with the IDE, the better. So that's actually a pretty cheap trick to speed up your IDE, just buy the fastest SSD that you can afford. Okay, some general IDE-specific advice, especially for those traveling. Yes, Deutsche Bahn also has electric circuit outlets now in their trains, but sometimes you have not enough of them. So what can you do to save some power? There's this power save mode in the file menu. And when I enable that, we will see that the highlighting is a bit small, but if you hover over it, it will tell you the current status. So we have just disabled all the code analysis, all the online highlighting in the editor, and that is actually one of the features that consumes most of the CPU. Because every time you type something, everything needs to be re-evaluated, and all the highlighting needs to be redone, and that is quite CPU intensive. So if you can live with a little bit less highlighting, that is a good way to save some battery. Another generic recommendation, sometimes people open their project and all of a sudden everything is red and nothing compiles and all the navigation is broken, and of course they didn't touch any of the project files. So we are coming back to the indices because sometimes they get broken and then nothing works because the IDE has no information. But there is one way to rebuild these indexes forcibly with invalidate caches and restart. And I'm not going to do this now because it takes some time, obviously. Be aware that this will reindex all of your projects, not just the current one. So just use it when you really don't know what to do else. All right, so the first group of features I want to talk about today is the user interface and how to navigate it. We have limited time still. I'm going to show quite a lot of features, but don't worry, there's only one thing that you need to take away today. And that will be just one shortcut you have to remember starting on Monday. And we are going to come to that very soon. So I am going to enable a plugin which is called Presentation Assistant. And what that does is, you can see it on the bottom. Every time I execute some action, it will show the name of the action as well as the corresponding shortcut. So while I'm demonstrating stuff now, you can maybe reread and maybe even memorize or recognize some of the shortcuts that I'm using here. And this is also very helpful if you are introducing new colleagues to this IDE and they need to learn what are you doing right now, right? So they can just watch. What other tools do you have to learn shortcuts? There's a plugin and it's called Key Promoter X. Has anyone used that maybe? Okay, a couple of. So I can actually not demonstrate it live in the IDE because it's not compatible with the IDE I've installed on this machine, but I can show you the plugin in action. So what does it do? Anytime you invoke any action, any menu using the mouse, it will give you those next screens and show you the corresponding shortcut, and it will even give you a summary in this tool window about the shortcut learning curve that you have. So I highly recommend installing that to learn more shortcuts. You will go home and you will need only one shortcut, and you can explore everything with that as well. I also brought some key maps I put in there as well as some stickers, so please take them with you to learn some more. All right, so the magic shortcut that you have to learn today, that's the only thing I expect you to memorize. And that is one of two. It's basically your choice. Help find action. And that opens this pop-up, which allows me to browse, for example, classes just by typing, files and symbols, and we are going to explore those very soon. But the thing I want to show first is actions. So, for example, if I don't know the shortcut for rename refactoring, I can just use this pop-up and look it up, right? So the shortcut is shown right behind the action. So you don't need to memorize all the shortcuts immediately, but you just need to memorize what the action is called, or maybe similarly called. You can also look up all the actions if you're unsure if one exists like this. And there's even a cool feature if, for example, an action doesn't have a shortcut assigned yet, you can just use Alt-Enter. And now, oops, no, wrong shortcut. We can enter a new shortcut for this action and assign it immediately, right? So you don't need to look in the settings for it. So find action is the only shortcut you need, basically, to look up all the actions in the IDE. It also shows all the settings that are available. And for example, show line numbers is the setting of the editor settings, and you can toggle those on-off buttons just using the enter key, and you will see the effects immediately, right? So you don't have to open the dialog, search for it, enable, disable, close the dialog, see the effect, but you can do it all right from this pop-up. There's an alternative way of invoking this, and that's called search everywhere. And that shortcut is even easier to remember, maybe. It's just double shift. And that will bring up exactly the same dialog. So let's talk a bit about the other tabs we have here. Go to classes. That's probably one of the mainly used features for some software developer. And let's take this class as example. So the full name is this, but we don't want to type in all of this, right? Until we limit down the list enough. But what we are going to do, because we are smart people and we are also lazy, we are just going to type in the capitals, right? So as soon as you put multiple capital letters after each other, it will just basically insert a star search, and everything between those capitals will be matched. That's a huge time saver, and after some time you will remember the abbreviations of the most navigated classes in your project. Go to files is basically the same, but it allows you to navigate to, for example, HTML files or whatever else is in your project. And looking at this example, we see well, not too many, but let's imagine there would be more results than the 2 for the file 1.html. But you can limit the list a bit, and you can limit it by the name of the containing directory. So what we can do is just type something like this, and now only the files being in a directory which has formatter somewhere in the path will be found, okay? The next navigation variant is symbols. So what are symbols? Symbols are basically everything that the IDE or the plugins or the languages or frameworks declare to be a symbol. So in normal programming languages, that would be methods and fields. In CSS, that would be IDs or classes. And in Spring MVC, for example, you could also navigate to request mappings. So it really depends on the installed technologies and what they offer as symbols. So, for example, we can navigate to methods here and also to fields. We probably have some of this name. Yeah. So those are basically the navigation possibilities if you are somewhere and you want to go somewhere or look up something. How can you look up something? Well, we can now open this file and inspect it. Or we can just use a shortcut, quick definition. And that will pop up this hint that shows the declaration of this element. Sorry, my voice is a bit bad after cold. So you don't have to navigate to the declaration all the time, but you can also use just this shortcut, it works also in the editor. There's one more thing about the UI, and that is navigating UI elements. So one of the core concepts of the IntelliJ platform is that we make everything usable via the keyboard. You don't have to use the mouse, and we actually, of course, do not recommend using it. So, for example, if you have a tree with many entries here, you can just start typing. And the matching entries will be shown here. And if there are multiple entries matching, you can just use cursor up and down to navigate to the search result. So this tool window for project can also be navigated to from the editor, for example. So if I want to open the declaration of this class in the project tool window, I can use a function called select in. And I can also use this here. And this will give me a list of all the tool windows which are available as navigation target for the currently focused element. So it could also be opened, for example, on the file system, reveal and finder here, in the navigation bar, that would be up here, and so on. That's quite handy to basically focus the current element in some of the tool window that support it. Also, project structure is very useful because it opens the current module where this file or element is located in if you want to change the module or project settings for that. One more thing about the UI I like to do is using background pictures. So why would I do this? Or how does it look actually? Okay, someone is freezing now. One second. So set background picture, and this allows me to choose a picture. I like this one. And you can also enable it for the current project only. And why does this make sense? For example, if you have the same project for multiple customers, you can put the customer logo for the specific project in the background, and you will always know what project you have open, right? So I use this to mark the release branches. So every time I have a variant of the release branch open, I will have this guy warning me, pay attention what you do here, what you push, because that's the release branch. And now we get rid of it again, of course. Navigation inside the editor. So we just navigated from anywhere to anywhere else. And in the editor, there's also the so-called file structure pop-up, which shows me all the elements inside the current editor. And again, you can use the keyboard here to navigate as well. So I can just start typing and the list will filter down. So that's very handy to find something in the current editor. About the editor, there's one nice setting, and I will demonstrate this in the settings editor here about the font. And that's called font ligatures. So if you use a font like, for example, Fira Code that supports ligatures, we will see something that looks maybe a bit strange, but I think it's a very nice feature for programmers. So watch this small area now, and you can see that the symbols are replaced by specific characters which are a bit nicer, maybe, but it's, yeah, your taste. So maybe just give it a try if you like it or not. Time is running, so let me just open a little bit easier file to demonstrate some basic editor actions, and then we'll shortly switch to the Q&A. I hope you have some questions already. So how do we copy and paste? Of course, we use the keyboard shortcuts. If nothing is selected, what gets copied? The current line. Same for cut. So there's no need to select the whole line or whatever. Duplicating a line, there's a special shortcut for that. No, I want this one. So that's also quite handy. How do we paste if we have a lot of stuff? We are moving between different parts. So there's one. No, actually, there are two things that will help you learn shortcuts, and that is all the shortcuts follow a certain system in IntelliJ. So the same shortcut can be invoked, for example, using Shift additionally, or using the same shortcut and pressing it twice. That will probably give you a variant, for example. The rename refactoring works like that. So I invoke rename, and what I get is usually the inline rename where I can just now type the new name and apply it. But I know that there is a rename dialog which has a bit more options. So I can just invoke the same shortcut. I don't need to learn a new shortcut twice, and now I get the full version. The same is true, or the other concept of adding keyboard modifiers is true for the search. So navigate class, navigate to file has Shift added, and navigate to symbol has Shift and Alt added. So it's one shortcut. It gives you all the variants just by adding keyboard modifiers. Going back to copy-paste, there's one nice little thing that many people don't know. There's a paste history. And it follows the same principle with the keyboard shortcuts again. So you just have to use Shift additionally to get the extended version of paste, which gives you a copy buffer of all the elements in there. Now you can just select them or just type the number in front of them and it will be inserted in the editor. So that's also very handy. Moving things, especially in code, sometimes a bit, not really fun. So we have to copy paste stuff from left to right, for example. But there's a shortcut, and the shortcut is move element left and right, and it does just that. Okay, so if you have a method with 50 booleans and you got one right, one wrong, you can just move the boolean now from left to right and fix it immediately without fixing all the other ones. This also works, for example, in XML. So if we have a number of attributes here, I can also sort them. So that's very handy if you want them sorted alphabetically or something. Editing, we usually have one cursor, but sometimes it's quite handy to have multiple cursors. So you can just insert them, right? And now I will start typing and all the cursors will act synchronously. And any action I invoke will be invoked synchronously, right? So, okay, we have that already. What else do you got? So, even completion works like that. Undo as well, of course. Another mode is actually the column selection mode. And that is quite handy if you have, for example, okay, not a good sample. Well, okay, let's imagine that you have tabular data in your text file, and switching to the column selection mode will allow me now to select any rectangle inside that file, and now I can delete it or insert characters in all the selected cursor area at once. Nearly last bit I want to show is completion. So let's see what we have here. For example, we insert a method call, and we would fill out all the parameters, but obviously we have a missing semicolon. There is the shortcut complete current statement, and it will insert anything that is missing on the current line, including parentheses, or even missing curly braces if you have, for example, anonymous classes or lambdas. So that's a quite handy time saver if you don't want to type all of these manually. Somewhat similar is a feature to work with strings, for example. So let's imagine that we have this multi-line string and we want to join it again. So of course I could do this all using manual editing, but that's taking too long. So there's a shortcut join lines, and it will take care of that as well. Now let's put another nice feature into action here. And that one is called language injection. You can invoke it using Alt-Enter, the intention, and select inject language or reference. And now the string is SQL, right? So you get all the highlighting here, and you get all the completion here as well. Because basically this string is now treated as being a mini SQL file inside the string, so all the functionality from the database plugin is available here. And that works with any kind of language, and also with references. For example, one reference we can inject is encoding. So now we have completion for all the available encodings. And if I try something that doesn't work, it will also be highlighted. Okay, time is running very fast. I think we can try and see what we have as questions. If there aren't any, I will have some more to show, but you should have your chance.
So yeah, you can put your questions there. I'm going to start it. Well, thank you for this very interactive insights. For the insights, we'll start. So the question is, how does WebStorm perform with TypeScript?
I know that WebStorm does, of course, support TypeScript. I have to admit that I have not been active in web development for the last 10 years. So I cannot answer any details, but you can look up all the available features on the website. So there are quite detailed demonstrations of the supported TypeScript versions or variants there.
You earlier said that you will not have any comparison on other editors, but there's this question ranked really high. Why should I use IntelliJ when I could use VS Code?
I cannot answer that that question. I'm not here to sell anything either. I'm just trying to help you using IntelliJ. So it's your choice. I mean, if you prefer VS Code or Eclipse or any other editor or integrated development environment, that's fine with me. You have to try it and see what works for you and your project. That's the only answer I can give.
Yeah. What do you think is the most underrated shortcut people don't use often enough?
The underrated shortcut. That's a good question. Well, I could probably show 20 of them, something that nobody knows, but it's hard to really pick one. But I want to show maybe one feature that many people don't know, which is quite handy. So for example, let's assume that I don't like the formatting in my code, because someone has set up all of this in the code style for Java. And if we just scroll there very quickly, you can see there's about 200 options or more. So that's quite annoying to find and try them. But there's a shortcut that many people don't know of. And you can just select, for example, this block. Let's assume there's something which you don't like in formatting inside here, and then invoke via Alt-Enter again, adjust code style settings. And that will use that block and show you only the matching settings which are available inside this code block. So calculating, and that's the result. So you can save a hell lot of time to find the right settings to tweak the formatting. So I hope that's useful to some of you.
Yeah, really cool. Thank you. So you mentioned earlier that the session usually is 2.5 hours long. Do we have any chance to see that long session?
Yes, actually, if you go to my Twitter website, there are, I think, 2 recordings of this talk in German, unfortunately. But they are a bit longer, like 2 hours or something, and I show much more than I could show now in this limited time. And maybe that's also a good point to switch back to my presentation, because these are the things that you can do now to continue learning from the things that I showed. So you can reach me on Twitter. I'm happy to answer your questions. There's a support email, which is free for everyone. They are usually very quick in answering. I suggest everyone to read the blogs that we have, where we announce new features or sometimes even tips and tricks. And if you want to see more tips and tricks videos, there's also many of them on YouTube for specific languages, for specific frameworks or specific IDEs. So especially if you're new, for example, to some web framework, you can try and locate a tutorial there and see everything in action. So you can explore all the features just by watching someone using them. That's what I would recommend doing. Especially since YouTube allows you to set the playback speed, so you can optimize your learning.
Cool. So what if I use the add language annotation and then someone else opens the code in a different IDE?
Yeah, good question. So the add language annotation we just saw when I used the inject language or reference feature is indeed a custom annotation, but it's open source. It is source only level, so it doesn't need to go into the compilation result. And there's also a way, not for local variables or fields, but for methods to define all these language injections inside the IDE instead of using the add language tag inside the code. So you don't need to use it for all the ways of injecting languages.
Okay, so there's a Maven question. There's someone that has a lot of Maven packages in his project. What's the easiest way to locate the Maven package for the current opened file?
I don't have a Maven project available right here, but I would say that if you can open a class which is from some library, what should work is the feature select in, or there's even a feature, an action select in project view, and that should open the project view with the currently selected class. So then you can go upwards and locate the containing jar and use that as helping point to find something. There's also, if you have the Ultimate Edition of IntelliJ, there's also a graph of the Maven dependency tree, so that might also be useful to inspect what libraries you have in your project.
Okay. There's a little longer question. When working in a split view with 2 editors, is there a way to open it in the not active editor? Because most of the time it opens in the active one.
I don't know. I don't use split mode a lot. I know it has some problems switching between the current and unfocused editor, so maybe that's just a bug. I don't know.
Okay. Is there a function to decapitalize the capitalized string?
Yes. So Command Shift U. Yeah, toggle case. There's also a plugin which has many more variants of toggling stuff and shifting stuff. I don't know the name, but you should be. String manipulator, right? Thank you. So that one is very nifty, and it does all the magic. I think you can even decrease and increase date strings or whatnot. So that's a very handy thing.
Okay. Will C-Line support Unreal Engine 4 anytime soon?
Will C-Line support Unreal Engine? I don't know. I'm not aware of such plans. Please go to our bug tracker and file a feature request or upvote an existing one. We need to know about users wanting stuff.
Okay, nice. Using code coverage, how can I quickly jump from the line to the related test?
Yes. I'm pretty sure it is possible. I cannot do this right now because it takes some time. I know there's a shortcut to navigate between a class and its tests, and the action is called go to test. Yes. Command Shift T. Yes, thank you. My cold is killing me. Navigate test, yes, Command Shift T. And you can see that it works quite nicely. It does some assumptions about the naming, so it doesn't work every time, but it also works way backwards, so that's quite handy. And I'm pretty sure that from the code coverage you can go to the corresponding other places as well.
Okay, then does IntelliJ support language service protocol?
No. Well, there is a plugin which does support LSP protocol. I didn't try it myself, and I'm not aware of the status or features that it really supports inside of LSP. So you can try that plugin maybe.
Okay, I would say last question, but I think you'll stay here a little longer because there were a lot of questions coming in. If I have IntelliJ Ultimate, can I install plugins for many programming languages? Do you have any advantages if I use the specialized IDE like PHP Storm?
Yes, so yes, Ultimate supports everything except for the Mac-specific stuff. So for that you have to use AppCode as separate product. The advantage or disadvantage is basically one is the prices are different. And the other one is if you don't do any of Java and all of that stuff that is packaged with IntelliJ, for example, if you only or mostly do front-end development, you don't want to be bothered with all the project settings and stuff like that, then WebStorm or PHP Storm will be much easier to learn and configure. That's one of the main advantages.
All right, cool. I know you all have a lot of questions, but Yann will stay longer to answer them. And now I'd like to hand over to Martin.